Yesterday, Canon News put out a video about a new camera called the C5, and based on the name, we know this is going to be a budget entry-level cinema camera. Why is that? Well, when it comes to naming on the cinema side, the larger the number, the more capable, the more powerful, and the more expensive the camera. So C5 would sit below the C70. But when I looked at the rumored specifications for that camera, a lot of things didn't quite pan out. It didn't make an awful lot of sense to me. For example, it's going to have a 22.5 megapixel sensor, but it's going to be able to do 8K sampling. Well, 8K sampling at 8192 by 2160. And 8192 by 2160. I don't know of any sensor that can do 8192 by 2160 on a 22.5 megapixel sensor. The Canon R5, for example, and the R5C, well, and even the Z9 all have the same aspect ratio full frame sensors. So that means to be able to do DCI 4K, you need at least 45 megapixels, or 45.6 or 7 to be exact, but essentially you need a 45 megapixel sensor. So 22.5, that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But before I go on to the why this camera doesn't make a lot of sense, there's several other things that don't make a lot of sense too. We want to take a look at other cameras. Today, Canon Rumors went out and put another news story out covering the Canon news story from the previous day in a separate story. But today they came out and said, well, you know, maybe if there's smoke, there's fire. And it kind of jogged Craig's memory about a C50. And if you remember back, we covered the C50 and the C90 back in 2020, and these were rumored to be coming out in the first quarter of 2021. Well, an awful lot of cameras were rumored to be coming out in 2021. Those two cameras, a bunch of 8K cinema cameras, a 4K cinema camera, I think it was the C300, 500, and 700DR, along with an RP replacement, another Canon EOS R, full-frame mirrorless camera, and of course some APS-C cameras. And we really didn't get much at all in terms of 2021. So the C50, these right here are the original specs for the C50 that was supposed to be coming out as really kind of an entry-level camera that's going to sit below the C70. Now keep in mind the C70 is priced right around $5,500. And of course we just got the R5C, which is what, about $4,500? So the C50 probably would be priced somewhere in the middle at, let's say, around $5,000. But what's really kind of confusing me is that this space is getting rather congested. We've got huge gaps in Canon's lineup, from the EOS RP all the way up to the R6. The R6, the R5, they're about a year and a half old, but when we look at the RP and the EOS R, we're going back to 2018, 2019, and they're all based on technology found in the 5D Mark IV. So to get a whole bunch of cameras, cinema cameras, right within the space, I don't know if that makes sense. Now, one thing I could conjecture is that the C50, the C5, are really what ended up becoming the R5C. But let's take a look at some of the other specifications for this supposed Canon EOS Cinema C5. It is supposed to do 4K up to 120 frames per second, and again, it's going to do 8K oversampling, 8192 by 2160 on a 22.5 megapixel sensor. But some of the other things it says that kind of confuse me. Now, they do mention that it isn't going to have a mechanical shutter, and in a video camera, well, that makes perfect sense. Why would you even mention that? Unless, of course, it's going to have a whole bunch of stills capabilities of the R5, which we got in the R5C. It is going to have IBIS, in-body stabilization. Okay, so the R5C didn't have in-body image stabilization for a couple of reasons. One, cinema cameras don't get stabilization because if you mount them to cars or other objects and they're bouncing around, you're basically going to destroy the IBIS. And, you know, professionals, they don't want it. If they're going to do stabilization, they're going to put it on a dolly, they're going to put it on something else, a gimbal, to get that cinematic smooth footage. And of course, it's another thing inside the camera that takes up space that helps generate heat. So it made sense to do away with it. And let's not get into that argument if it would have made more sense to take the R5, just put a fan on it, and keep it as a stills hybrid camera with IBIS. I think that certainly makes a lot of sense too. But we're talking about the C5. So why take a camera, again, that's largely cinema, and only this time put IBIS in? Would that make any sense to the R5C that's currently in place? And what would it do for the C70? If anything, this camera seems like it's more powerful than the C70 and would make sense in a C70 Mark II. Now, these specifications don't make sense. And the R5C is supposed to have the same interface as the C70, so I imagine it's going to have much of the same operating system as the R5C got. Same layout. It's going to have internal recording. It's going to do 422. It's most likely going to have Canon Log 3. Doubt it's going to have Canon Log 2 if all this is panning out to be the case. And of course, if you're shooting below 72 frames per second, why 72? I don't know. But if you're shooting below 72 frames per second, then you're going to be able to really take advantage of that dual gain sensor, yes, DGO sensor, and be able to have better dynamic range. But what do you think? Do you think this makes any sense at all? Do you think the R5C has any credibility? Again, I want to go back to Craig at Canon Rumors when he put out the story yesterday, and he was referencing Canon News. Canon News carried it, and he put it out as a CR1 because he didn't have any validation. And I looked at it for the same reasons that I've mentioned here today. I didn't feel the point of covering it. It just seemed all over the place. It seemed silly. But then more news came out today, and I like what Craig was saying. He says, well, look, when there's smoke, there's fire, and it could be leading to something else. And I certainly think that makes a lot of sense. Canon is planning on doing a full refresh of their cinema line. We've got two rumored 8K cameras, a full frame and a Super 35, both with dual gain sensors. And these are going to have incredible dynamic range from 16 to 17 stops of dynamic range. And then, of course, the C700 DR with up to 240 frames per second in wide mode, also a dual gain sensor and 20 stops of dynamic range. It's a very, very powerful camera. And these are supposed to be coming out this year. Now, as far as a C50 and a C90, well, it depends. It really depends on what they do with a C100 or a C200. The C300 is a really good camera and it's priced right, but I'm a little unsure of the strategy that Canon's going to use with the C50 and the C90, and does the C50 even make sense? Or, and here's the other thing, is what the C50 going to be? Was that one of those cameras that Canon pulled to make better and ended up developing the R5C? Now that to me makes a whole lot more sense, but let me know what you think in the comment section down below. What I get the sense that this one is somebody heard something or they read something and they thought, hey, let's see if I can come up with what I think this could be. And this story would have made a whole lot more sense if it had come out in the weeks leading up to the R5, the R5C that is. Because right now, again, 22.5 megapixel sensor being able to do 8192 by 2160 sampling, which is essentially 8K over sample 4K. It could be 8K over sample 2K or 1080, but that doesn't make any sense. You can't do that. It doesn't make sense. It's not like we're going back to the 1990s with the Amiga technology and doing some sort of crazy extra half-bright mode. We don't need to do that today because we've got the bandwidth, we've got the sensors. It would just be a silly thing to do. It doesn't make any sense. And to put IBIS in this camera when it was taken out of the R5C, it would lead me to believe that the person in charge of Canon's product line for cinema and stills hybrid cameras is actually a gorilla, monkey, or orangutan that really doesn't understand physics or camera technology. No, I don't think this one makes a lot of sense, but if you want to stick around, I've got some special guests coming up tonight at 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. That's Toronto, Montreal, and New York time, or even Atlanta time, I believe. And I'm going to have James Jackson from James Jackson Films on the show, and we're going to talk about this along with many other subjects that have been making news this week. He shoots with cinema cameras. He also has experience with the R5, and we're going to talk about the R5C. We're going to talk about this camera. I'm getting all the names mixed up. The EOS 5, what am I calling it? The EOS C5. See, the name. This is almost beginning like Olympus and all the different names here. But the C5, the C50, what other cinema cameras make sense? We're going to talk about that tonight. I'm also going to have some other specialists on from the retail industry here in Canada talking about the Nikon Z9, somebody who's been very experienced with Nikon gear over the years and what he thinks of the Nikon Z9 and how well it's selling up here. And that's Brian Rice. And we've also got many other people that are going to be showing up tonight. I think it's going to be a full show starting at 6 p.m. and it's going to go at least an hour. But with these guests, I have a sense that it's going to go even longer. And I've got a guest from the UK showing up tonight as well. So stay tuned. And John, if you're watching, John Drummond, if I can't get you in tonight, we're definitely going to get you in next week. So there's an awful lot of news going on. Lots of cameras to talk about. The R7. So we know that this camera, according to Canon Rumors, it's a CR2, is coming out in March of this year. But what we don't know, is it going to be a full frame camera or is it going to be an APS-C camera? There's arguments to both sides of this. All we got from Canon as a pretty much a certainty is that we got a camera called the R7 coming out. Big news there. I mean, who didn't know that Canon's going to come out with an R7? They got an R5 and an R6. An R7 makes sense. I mean, we had on the old DSLR system, we had a 7D, didn't we? So it makes sense that we'd get an R7. Just what is it going to be? And of course, we got the WOW camera. We've got the GH6 announcement coming up on the 23rd and the 24th. This leads us up to CP+, so we got a lot of CP+ coverage coming up as well. It's just going to be a live session filled with a lot of jam. And if you like jam like me, especially marmalade, bring some toast, bring some bread, have a coffee, tea, or whatever your other favorite beverage is, and join me at 6 o'clock tonight. And we'll take your questions. We'll have a dynamic conversation. And if you're really kind of like, what the heck is this C5? Does it make any sense? And you want to know a little bit more, definitely tune in, because we're going to get James Jackson to make his comments. But as far as I'm concerned, the C5 doesn't make any sense in any way whatsoever based on Canon's current lineup. Before the R5C came along, sure. And I get it. I could see Canon come out with like a camera that's right around $2,000 to $3,000, aimed at those that are looking at getting into filmmaking, entry level. It follows the cinema line. It's for cinema people. It's for those that don't want to spend the money of $2,000 or so on a camcorder. So yes, it would eat into that market. So there's that. And Canon doesn't usually like to do that. And of course, look at how many up-and-coming filmmakers that have started with cameras like the GH5 or the Canon 90D or the Sony a6100, a6400. If you're talented, you don't need a really expensive cinema camera to be able to show your stuff. No, you just need a camera, and you need a good imagination and good storytelling capabilities. I mean, look at how George Lucas and Spielberg got started. I think these guys worked with Super 8 cameras. So we'll just have to wait and see. But as far as this one goes, Craig put it as a CR1, and then in today's, he didn't put a CR on it at all, but he says, you know, where there's smoke, there's fire, and I get that there certainly is. We're going to be getting a bunch of cinema cameras this year, but who knows? And of course, again, because of supply chain constraints, any dates, even if we're talking about rumors that are very, very bang on, we're getting them from sources internally, because it hasn't been announced, dates can change. And as we saw with the GH6 back in 2020, and then later this year, even when dates are announced, they can be pushed because, well, there's so much. Well, why? You know why. There's so many reasons why, but basically supply chains, verticals, horizontals, everything is completely shattered, and it's just, you know, it's fingers crossed as to what comes out. So when I see CR2s and CR3s, those videos are the ones I'm going to get out to you right away. If I see a CR1 or CR0, unless it's making the rounds and making a lot of noise, I'm not going to bother covering it because it's just silliness. But thank you so much for watching The Ordinary Filmmaker. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps this channel grow, but personally for me, when I see my subscribes go up, I take it as a virtual pat on the back, and I really look forward to getting that 30,000 subscriber mark. That's kind of a big deal for me because I'm no longer just kind of an entry-level guy. I'm starting to get noticed. I'm almost closer to that 50,000, and if I eventually get to that 100,000 mark, which seems so very, very far away, that's when I will be giving away a Canon EOS R5 full-frame. I forgot what I was going to say. Canon EOS R5 full-frame censored. Why can't I say this? A Canon EOS R5 full-frame mirrorless camera. That's the word I couldn't remember to say. Mirrorless. It was in there, but when I tried to say it, it didn't come out. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you tonight at 6 o'clock. See you again soon.